Well, good afternoon. We wanted to do this update video about All for Reef. I posted one a few weeks ago and our numbers were kind of high, and we're trying to get our magnesium up to support some of the species that we wanted to grow in our test tank behind me here. And the problem that we were having, and this is a mistake I was making, and I always come forward, if I make a mistake, I'm going to share it with you. Our mistakes help us all to learn, and if we don't learn from our mistakes, well, what's the sense of it doing any of it? So if I turn on my second video here, let me turn this on really quick so you can take a look at this. We were looking at these numbers last time, and I'm using All for Reef, and my calcium was getting up to 440. My magnesium was at 1250, but I was dosing magnesium, and my alkalinity kept going up, and I was trying to increase the amount of All for Reef I was using in my tank in order to get the magnesium up. It was a mistake. I'm chasing numbers. I made the mistake I said nobody should make, that I didn't really make when I was doing a 3-part, when I went to the 2-part. Now I'm using an all-in-one, and I'm sort of re-educating myself as to not take it upon myself to know better than the engineers and the scientists know when they design All for Reef. And that's exactly what I was doing. I tried to do things my way instead of doing it the Tropic Marine way, and I started running into equilibrium problems. So as I was increasing my calcium and my alkalinity, of course, was going up, my magnesium was going down, my equilibrium was all over the place. And the problem I was having is I was very simply overdosing. I was using too much All for Reef. It's a powerful product, and if you don't have the absorption in your tank, if you're not taking up alkalinity and calcium at the rate that you really need to when you're dosing, your equilibrium kind of goes haywire, and that's exactly what was happening. So before we get into what I was doing, I'm going to show you the tank itself. Let me turn the second monitor off. And I'm going to turn this video on so you can take a look at this. And with the video, you're going to see this is my tank setup. I have basically, this is 70 gallons in the display. I don't have a whole lot of coral in there. I have some frags in there that are doing just fine. I'm not going to zoom in and get into anything in each one by name. So a couple of chalice, got some zoas, got some pallies, got some Goniopora. I have a couple of, there's of course the Alveopora. So I have a couple of nice little frags, but there's not a lot of consumption there, not a lot of calcium and alkalinity absorption. So as I'm trying to get my alkalinity up, mainly for my Goniopora, I ended up with a problem. And the problem was, let me turn this off and stop it there. No, let's keep going. And the problem I was having was simply, I was chasing magnesium. And I was trying to get my magnesium up above 1400. And what was happening is I was increasing the calcium, increasing the alkalinity, everything else in All for Reef was going up. But my magnesium wasn't, because there was not enough uptake of the calcium and alkalinity for equilibrium to level off. So I ended up with some crazy numbers. Now let me just go back a little bit here in the video just to show you my setup down here. This is my sump. I just cleaned it, so it was getting kind of dirty. Just cleaned my protein skimmer. So I have basically just an easy sock filter coming in. I use monofilament. I use nylon. I don't use the silk socks or the fabric socks, and mainly because they really cause my my protein skimmer to go haywire. So every time I would change the sock out, my protein skimmer would go way down, and then it would start skimming too much. And I found that using nylon and basically didn't cause that to happen. So I went right to the nylon socks. I believe it's a 200 micron, so it does some very good filtering. You can get smaller ones. I think you can get them off of Amazon right now, up to 100, 200, 300, 400, whatever you want to do. 200 is a good number for me. So I have the protein skimmer running. Let me turn this video back on. You can see in the center I have a reactor, and in the reactor I keep Phosbond. I use Seacam, that's the name of the company. I use Seacam's Phosbond. It does a good job of keeping my phosphate in check, and Tropic Marine does have a product to do that. I can't get it locally, and even Petco's not carrying it. If they do, they don't have it in my store, and even the local shops don't really have it. They do have the All for Reef. You know, we're using All for Reef. Just to show you what I'm using here, All for Reef. I use NP, Alemi NP, when I have to drop my nitrates and phosphates. If I want them to come up, I use Plus NP. I also use Zeolite. Zeolite is a nice product, and I'll tell you what was happening. We're going to talk about salt in just a second, because I changed that too to correct my numbers. But I was finding high amounts of aluminum and boron in my ICP tests. So I ran zeolite and those numbers came down, and then when I stopped using the zeolite, they came back up. I found it was actually the salt doing it, so I switched from the Red Sea blue bucket to reef crystals. I know everybody, reef crystals, ocean, everybody says Instant Ocean is the cheapest one out there. It's also one of the best. And I was watching a couple of videos in Tidal Gardens, and when Tam at Tidal Gardens says, I'm using reef crystals, and he has one of the nicest setups, the best corals you could get, the healthiest you could get, you pay attention. So I switched myself also, and I don't really need to use the zeolite anymore because my aluminum and my boron started dropping since I did that. I also use phosphate. Phosphate is a great product from Tropic Marin, and it creates a phosphate that's in a particulate formula so that your corals can uptake it without it increasing the phosphate levels in your tank. It's really an incredible product. I don't think there's anybody else doing it at all. I do use activated charcoal, maritime, whatever it is. Marine land, that's it, marine land. Only because it's cheap. I rinse it good. I don't see a big difference between the charcoals. Some of it doesn't need to be rinsed as much. Some of it does. All of it will leach out if you leave it in your tank too long. So I change this out every 3 weeks to once a month, and it works just fine for me. Bacto balance, everybody should be using this Tropic Marin. It keeps my phosphates and my nitrates in nice ratio. So they're within ratio, that's healthy. If I have a 10 nitrate, I'm somewhere around 0.01 in phosphate. And it does a good job. If you keep your feeding under control, it does just fine. So going back to my sump, I'm running Phospan inside of the reactor here. I turn this back on. In the basket down here, I use C-Chem Matrix as my biomedia in the basket. And I also keep my activated charcoal down there. It does a good job. As we come over, of course, I got my sump pump, and I have my auto top-off system on a float valve. There's another video I did that shows you I'm using an RODI auto top-off. There's my RODI system. There's my chiller. Full disclosure, this is what's on this test tank. There's all my plumbing and wiring and everything. The red bucket C, again, I stopped using that. Let me go back there. And again, I'm not saying anything bad about Red Sea. It could have been a bad batch. It could have been sitting in a store for years and years. I have no idea. But after 2 buckets of it and aluminum and boron going up constantly, I just switched over to reef crystals, and you're going to see the difference. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. As we come over, I'm of course dosing back to a balance on my doser and my All for Reef in the left container there. My All for Reef at this point in time, so you know, when those numbers are getting high, when I was looking at those 440 calcium and my alkalinity was going up to 12 and higher, I stopped dosing. I just turned off the All for Reef doser. I started doing water changes using the reef crystals. And 3 weeks later, I'm going to show you my numbers. They came down to where I want them to be, but now they're starting to drop down even lower. So I'm going to start dosing All for Reef again, and I'm going to tell you exactly how we're doing that. You turn this back on. I have a pretty simple pour voice setup. There's an old generic doser that runs. It does just fine for me. Again, the Red Sea crystals, that's kind of the end of the line for Red Sea. I'm just not going to use it anymore for now. So that's this basic setup right there. Pretty easy and straightforward. Let me turn that off. We don't need to see that again. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn on our second display. And these are the numbers that I had back about 3 weeks ago. So if you look at the data on there, that was 1029. This is what, 1123. So about 3 weeks ago. My calcium was hitting 440. My alkalinity was approaching 12, way too high. Everything else was fine, but I was also dosing magnesium. Without dosing the magnesium, it was dropping down to about 1200 and even lower. I think my lowest reading with using All for Reef and the problem with overdosing was like 1150. I like to keep it around 1400 or above because I like Goniopora, and I also like coralline algae growing in my tank to prevent hair algae and other pests from taking over that area of the surface of the rock where coralline algae will grow over that surface of the rock to prevent hair algae and other things from growing. Also makes it nice looking, it's good for the corals, everything's good and healthy. So these are my numbers, and what happened was, I'm going to show you first as we go over, I switched salts. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so you can see it. If you look at this chart of salts, and this is what happens with the different varieties of salt. I was using, let me get over here so you can see this, I was using the Red Sea, the blue bucket. Right? So if you look at the blue bucket here, calcium levels are 410. Alkalinity is supposed to be 7.7. I think that's probably where it runs at, but because I was overdosing All for Reef, my alkalinity was going up. So alkalinity is probably pretty close, 7.7 to 8. But if you look at the magnesium, it's only 1280. And so at 1280, I could see why it was dropping down, and I was trying to use All for Reef to make up for that. The truth of the matter is, if you go down and if you look at Tropic Marin's Pro Sea Salt, theirs runs 1380. So that's a little bit better. Their alkalinity is 8.5, and of course their calcium is 450, where we like to be. Red Sea is at 410. Now I went to Reef Crystals. So you go up here to Reef Crystals, their calcium is 490. That's pretty sweet. So just using Reef Crystals without dosing anything, I'm pretty good until I start, dropping that calcium numbers down. Their alkalinity is at 13. However, me using it, because it is absorbing alkalinity with the amount of corals I have, which isn't a lot. I got a couple of little fracs, so there's not a lot of absorption there. This salt is keeping up with my tank the way it is right now. So what I'm going to do, and I'm getting ready to start dosing All for Reef again and turn it on, I'm dropping down from 10 milliliters a day to 2 milliliters a day. Big difference. So I'm dropping that way down, and as my corals grow and I start adding more acros to that to increase uptake of alkalinity, I'll start increasing my All for Reef in a reasonable way, the way it was designed to be used, not the way I want to use it. So, and that's what happens. I was chasing numbers, trying to apply my logic to their product, when their logic, their system, their scientists know what they're doing. Now, if you look at the Reef Crystals and their magnesium, 1440, that's where I want to be. So Reef Crystals for me was a great option to switch out of using the Blue Bucket Red Sea. I had to take my All for Reef and bring that down to a reasonable level. I cut it out completely for 3 weeks, did water changes twice a week with Reef Crystals. I only did 5 gallons on, an 80-gallon, 70-gallon tank behind me. All together with the sump and everything is about 100 gallons, so that's what I usually dose for it. So I did those water changes, and now that I've done all that, let me come over. And if you want this chart, just a heads up on that. If you go to our Facebook page, it's FishyFins Facebook page. You click on files, you can download this. So if you want to know what the difference of all the salt is, we have it on a chart right here for you. Now let me go over to our next reading here. Let me make this a little bit smaller so we can see it. Not that much smaller, not that big. Okay, here we go. So this was taken today. So today, and this is after, again, not dosing any All for Reef at all for 3 weeks, doing water changes, switching over to Reef Crystals. I'm still doing the Bacto balance. I never stopped using that. It's a great product. However, my calcium has dropped down to 400 now. Now that's where I wanted to be, 380 to 400. And when it hit there, I was going to start adjusting my All for Reef, which it has. So I'm going to start dosing a very small amount of All for Reef for a week, 2 milliliters a day on a 100-gallon tank, just to see what my numbers change. My alkalinity is down to 10. That's where I wanted it to be, between 9 and 10. I'm happy. And my magnesium, without dosing magnesium anymore for 3 weeks, is up to 1450 using Reef Crystals in my water changes. So it made a huge difference in my overall equilibrium. My phosphates, my nitrates have come down reasonably too. If you look at my phosphate there, I think let me make that a little bit bigger so you can see those numbers. So my nitrates are at 7, which is fine. My phosphates are at 0.15, which is a little bit high still. However, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to change my phosphate out. And I use a small amount because I've been doing the water changes. And I'm going to put this back in the reactor, a nice fresh bunch, and those will come down quickly with phosphate. Again, this is a great product. If you don't want to have to get into a refugium, and refugiums themselves can create a real problem unless you have a lot of fish, and there's a lot of fish poop that's feeding that chaeto algae. And I say that, well, chaeto algae, whatever you want to call it. I get corrected on that all the time. Oh well. So using phosphate really keeps you out of adding more stuff to your tank, spending more money, increasing the work you have to do in maintenance. Again, if you have a big tank and it's full of fish and corals and you need to get those nitrates and phosphates under control, having a refugium can be a great thing. It's a lot of work because you got to keep up on it, you got to keep it clean, you got to keep trimming it every week. However, you could probably use something like phosphate from Seachem and be able to keep those under control. And I just use the NP minus MP or Lemmy MP from Tropic Marin. Does a great job, a couple of squirts a day until those nitrates come down, and the phosphate does fine for the phosphates. This does both, but it's very light, it's very easygoing, so you don't have to go crazy with it. So for me, that's plenty, and it keeps everything under control. So I just wanted to just correct this with All for Reef. I kind of was down on it a few weeks ago because I just couldn't get the numbers straight. It was me, it wasn't the All for Reef. And I'll be the first one to admit that. So when you're using All for Reef, again, you have to remember that it's not old school thinking, it's a new way of thinking, it's a new way of reefing. You have to really pay attention to what they're saying and do it the way they want to do it and not the way you want to do it. And if you start chasing numbers, it's always a good idea to stop dosing whatever you're doing, do water changes, because usually the salt itself is going to have everything you need. And if you did a water change every day with the salt that you're using, like reef crystals, you'd have perfect numbers. You'd have all the trace elements you need. You have all the alkalinity, all the calcium, all the magnesium. Everything you need is in the salt. But the thing is that we don't want to have to do water changes every day, and we don't want to have to carry buckets of water. And if you don't have an auto water change system, it can be a lot of work. But the truth of the matter is the salt has everything you need in it. So All for Reef is a great product when you have to start increasing the calcium, the alkalinity, the magnesium, the trace elements. If you start loading up your tank with a lot of coral and you want to do a water change once a week or once every 2 weeks, it's more reasonable. It makes your tank a lot more enjoyable because it takes what is an enjoyable, fun hobby and it doesn't turn it into a big job and a lot of work. So that's why I went to it. I got back into my old thinking of, I want to do it my way. I need to get the magnesium up, but I want my calcium at 480. I didn't have enough consumption in the tank. So if you're going to All for Reef and you're new at the hobby, one thing you have to remember is that, one, you need a lot of consumption, not a whole bunch like you see some of these tanks on YouTube where they have just packed full of acros. I mean, they're absorbing all kinds of calcium. They're pumping calcwalser and they're using All for Reef 40 milligrams a day plus 2 gallons of calcwalser a day, slurry, all kinds of stuff, trace elements, but they have a tank packed full of corals. As a matter of fact, Tropic Marin does too. So if you watch some of their videos that they have from their plant in Germany, their research facility, they're packed with corals. They got fish in there that can't even move around the corals. There's so many corals. I mean, it's great. It's beautiful. I love it, but I'm not that person. I don't have that many corals. You saw what I just showed you in the back. So if you're starting out and you're getting ready to use All for Reef, remember that what they recommend, I think it's like 7 milliliters per 100 gallons is about what they say to dose the powder. And you don't have enough alkalinity uptake or calcium uptake in your tank, you need to cut that number way down. So you may want to start with a couple of milliliters, check your water, do your water changes after a week, and see where that calcium is, and keep that calcium around 400. When the alkalinity stays from 9 to 10, right in that range, you should be okay. Again, using reef crystals, my magnesium is staying above 1400. I'm happy. So I hope that you get something out of this. And again, All for Reef, you can't do it your way. You got to do it their way. And their way is good. It works out very well. So I also have a video I'm doing. I was able to take care of my Aptasia problem. I got some frags in from somebody I bought off the internet. Another mistake. Be careful who you buy corals from because they could be full of pests. Even when you quarantine, they still may have some pests that are lodged up under the frag, and it could be a problem. So I did get that under control with help from a local pet store, and it's Boardroom Aquatics. I'm going to go out there and talk to Mark next week about doing a video with them about it. He sold me a file fish and a peppermint shrimp, and I also use Alemi Aptasia, and I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a Tropic Marin product that kills Aptasia, nice and neat. I did use Aptasia, and it's pretty neat and it works well, but it also leaves piles of glue and cement all over your rock work. And I mean piles of it. And it looked like something, I don't know. I didn't like the look of it. It did work well. It killed the Aptasia. It did work well. However, the Alemi Aptasia that Tropic Marin makes is a clear product. It injects right into the Aptasia. The Aptasia literally dissipates from the inside out. And then my file fish and my peppermint shrimp, and a big fat peppermint shrimp, Boardroom Aquariums gave me, they were eating up the Aptasia like there's no tomorrow. And I had them everywhere. It was crazy. Now I can't even find one in my tank. 3 weeks later, Aptasia problem solved. So I hope you guys got something from this video. Let me go ahead and turn this second display off. And again, tune into our channel. We have a YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page, FishyFins. You can check it out. A lot of updates. We're going to be doing some videos with our local pet stores to show you what they have, and also start using some other products, and so you can check that out too. We have some do-it-yourself stuff for the poor boy reefer. top-off systems, auto-dosing systems, all kinds of cool stuff. How to build your own refugium, and a fraction of what it costs you to buy some of this high-end equipment. Not that you shouldn't buy it. If you have the money, buy it. But if you like to do it yourself like I do, good videos. Hope to see you guys again. I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you in your reef tanks.